shift in their mind and their thinking, or are they like just parasites that leech onto power?
Yeah, I don't think it's a genuine shift at all. And I think a lot of these people, particularly the Silicon Valley billionaires, they are there because, the establishment wants them to be there. And so I don't really accept that, someone like Elon Musk is really anti-establishment when he's building the surveillance satellites for the CIA, and building brain chips to be commercialized. And it will soon be normal for everyone to have Neuralink and all of this stuff. He's also one of the biggest contractors to the Pentagon, which has an extensive bot operation on Twitter to manipulate people. And now that a Pentagon contractor owns Twitter, I don't think that those operations have been negatively impacted. Actually, the U.S. Air Force had a contract in 2014, more than 10 years ago, to study how to use social media to control people like drones. I don't think him acquiring Twitter, for example, was really about free speech. And I think a lot of these Silicon Valley billionaires are less than honest and say things to pander to certain demographics for the purpose of manufacturing consent for their products, because a lot of their products, especially the more controversial ones they want to roll out, will not be successful if they don't have a large enough user base. So they need to manipulate people into wanting to use those products, right? It's very convenient for Elon Musk to have people like Tim Pool being like, yeah, Neuralink, let's go. I mean, that helps sell a product that I think people otherwise, may not want. And, so for example, some of these Silicon Valley billionaires for a long time have framed themselves as libertarian, for example. The best example of this is Peter Thiel. But Peter Thiel, in my opinion, is not a libertarian. He openly says that free market competition is for losers, which seems very not libertarian to me. But, I mean, obviously there's people that hate libertarianism and say it is. I don't know. But it's not what, I always thought libertarians were people that wanted maximum freedom, maximum civil liberties, and maximum free market. And the United States today is not a free market. It's a rigged market. And really, I think that's true for most of the markets in the world. We have crony capitalism in the U.S. We don't have free market capitalism, at least at the big boy leagues, and I think that's pretty clear if you actually look into it. And, as someone that supposedly hates the nation state, as Peter Thiel does, he created Palantir, which gives the nation state more control and insight, invasive ability into people's lives than anything else in the CIA's toolbox. That's astounding and seems very not libertarian to me, but I think it helps sort of, define him as being something other than the other wing of elites in Silicon Valley that tend to fund the Democrats, right? Like Eric Schmidt is a big Democrat donor, and Peter Thiel was a big donor to Trump in his first election. J.D. Vance is sort of a proxy for Thiel, but, Palantir gave a lot of money to Trump. Other Palantir co-founders like Joe Lonsdale did. So there's definitely been a decent amount of overlap. Don't really see these people as looking to maximize, civil liberties for the public. Like Elon Musk, for example, free speech, but not freedom of reach. Is that really maximizing civil liberties? And what if, it's owned by someone who already collaborates with intelligence agencies and the military? What if that a pre-crime program like I described earlier on is implemented and social media posts are analyzed for mass shootings before they happen, and consider that type of program in the context of Elon Musk's promise to verify all humans on the platform by having them link their Twitter accounts to government-issued IDs? Again, complicated, and I don't necessarily see that about maximizing civil liberties. These people are, a lot of them are surveillance and intelligence and military contractors, and our national security state is not about maximizing civil liberties. It invades them, and it reduces them, and it takes them away when people are afraid and when consent is manufactured for those liberties to be surrendered. And so I think a lot of this is an attempt to build trust with the American public after trust was irreparably broken. And we saw this happen, during COVID. The World Economic Forum, among other groups, sort of rebranded their themes, and they became about rebuilding trust. How do we do that? And my colleague Mark Goodwin and I did some interviews and some work over a year ago now, talking about how back then they were shifting because trust had been so broken in the public sector, they were going to move more into the private sector. And we saw this happening with Javier Milei specifically in Argentina, who obviously ran a campaign as being very anti-establishment, invited people from previous very establishment governments to serve in his cabinet, people with an outsized role in creating Argentina's extreme debt problem via their role at JP Morgan, and brought in a very Orwellian security minister from the Mauricio Macri administration who has argued about implementing pre-crime in Argentina in recent months, unsettling, and that doesn't seem very libertarian to me. He's been very cozy with Silicon Valley oligarchs in the U.S. And has talked about, for example, like he campaigned eliminating certain government departments, like the Ministry of Education, for example, but replacing that with Facebook's AI that will train young Argentines for, the fourth industrial revolution workforce or something like that. I mean, is that really better? And, some people would argue that that is libertarianism, but I would argue that that's not good for Argentine sovereignty to dump major aspects of your government and replace it with a foreign company tied to foreign intelligence, right? As is the case with a lot of these Silicon Valley companies. And then invite a lot of, court people like Larry Fink of BlackRock and a lot of the big Wall Street banks. That doesn't seem anti-establishment to me necessarily. So I think, there's a lot of the idea about what libertarianism is, and that's being used to market these people, but they don't actually have those views that people seem to think they hold. People in the US and really anywhere will continue to be deceived until they're able to separate rhetoric from action. Elon Musk on Twitter says lots of things, but who knows if he actually tweets them? This guy is supposed to run several major large companies while also having high-level characters in multiple online video games, and also has time to tweet, essentially all day. So is he really managing all of that himself, and which things are really him and which things are not? I don't know. He's the world's richest man. You don't think he could hire a team to manage his social media account and put out content that will appeal to particular demographics that he wants to court, really have as much power as people give them credit for? As I mentioned, why would someone like Jeffrey Epstein be so influential in the lives of so many of them? I mean, I would argue a lot of them are pretty effectively controlled by higher powers, and that, I think once you get that level of money and influence, it becomes dependent on a lot of things, considering that essentially the power structure in the world, as I laid out earlier, is sort of, organized crime and intelligence sort of coming together. You have to play ball with those people if you want to become the richest billionaire in the world. But that's just my opinion. Maybe there are squabbles. I think there absolutely are some squabbles that are genuine. So as an example, Eric Schmidt, I mentioned earlier, a big Democrat donor, Peter Thiel, a big sort of Republican, libertarian figure. They're both on the steering committee of Bilderberg together, the closed door sort of globalist conference where, top political leaders meet top corporate leaders and decide things in secret. AI has consistently been a big focus of that. Alex Karp of Palantir goes to pretty much every meeting. And it's essentially been divided. I think Newsweek said that Bilderberg was essentially divided between factions of Schmidt and Thiel. But they come together and network and make decisions at those closed door meetings. So how much do they really disagree on? At the end of the day, they both seem to very much agree on pre-crime and an expansion of the surveillance state, and increased digital control over most people. Because if you look at their actions as CEOs and investors, that's what they have, essentially built. I think some of it is theater for us down here to keep us distracted and have our attention be elsewhere, and not on the things we can actually do to increase our own power, and distractions that get us to willingly and voluntarily outsource our power. I think the elites believe in karmic law, and I think they play a lot of games on people to get people to voluntarily do things they otherwise wouldn't do. And I think that's what a lot of the manipulations in media and in society are kind of ultimately at the end of the day. And so if there's a particular policy, for example, digital ID, or things like that you're against, you have to ultimately commit to not participate in them, even if efforts are made to manipulate you into consenting to that. And a lot of those efforts are based around fear about something. And it's very easy to manipulate how people perceive reality today That same Schmidt-Kissinger book I've been referencing doesn't refer to AI as like a revolution in the sense of making people's lives easier and all of this stuff, but as really a revolution in perception, how people perceive reality. So ultimately, you could argue that the elites sort of view it as the ultimate perception management tool. And I think that's ultimately what it's about, because if you can control how people perceive, that translates into control over behavior at the end of the day.
Like and subscribe.